Greetings, folks. Welcome to the Jason Damico Show. And we're here at Manifold Recording Studios. And I've had the privilege and honor to be able to intern here back a few years ago. And
you were more than an intern.
You think so?
Yeah.
Man,
absolutely.
The memories here were incredible. And
it's a special place. It really
is. Well, thanks for asking me on with
Sure.
the email that I sent back when I was 2021, looking for that type of opportunity, you know.
It's kind of funny. We do get a fair amount of, cold calls about that, and sometimes it's just who I get back to first as to who gets the spot.
Gotcha.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's very sort of roll the dice in terms of who ends up staying here.
Well, I'm blessed to say that I was here, and thank you for having me. Thanks for having me back.
Pleasure. Yeah.
So let's get into your bio real quick.
Okay.
25 plus years in the business.
Yep.
You've mixed and engineered multiple Grammy-nominated records. Mm-hmm. You've worked in Abbey Road No. 2, mm-hmm. Sony, Columbia Music Studios in NYC. Did some projects there.
Columbia, yeah, right. Yeah, I get Columbia and Capitol mixed up because I've also worked at Capitol in LA.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was the old Sony Columbia Studios in New York and Capitol in LA.
And your genre spectrum, as I know and everybody else knows out there, knows your name, very, very broad. Pop, hip-hop, jazz, classical, symphonic. And some
bluegrass opera,
and we'll get into that if we have time for sure. Classic artists such as Velvet Revolver, Roomful of Blues, Clay Aiken, Jason Moran, Kenny Chesney, Jerry Lee Lewis, Dixie Chicks, Bella Fleck, Branford Marsalis, Sarah Shook, multiple records with Sarah Shook, mm-hmm. and producers that you've worked with, Nile Rodgers, John Custer, just to name a couple. Mm-hmm. Voting member of the Recording Academy since 2006, mm-hmm. and chief engineer.
Of
the Mirrorverse.
Space
Manifold.
Mountain.
Yeah. As I call
Epcot Center.
The sanctuary.
Yeah.
Please welcome Ian Schreier, ladies and gentlemen. Anywhere.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Very proud to have been chosen to participate in Jason Talking.
Well, now we're going to have a little bit more of you talking.
Okay.
Beginning stages for you.
Okay.
Wherever you like to start. I mean, I remember you always telling me about the Queen records and, diving into that from an engineering standpoint and a drumming standpoint. But for you, when did the spark really start? Because you and I both have an affinity towards the drums. And,
yeah.
And then engineering as well.
Yeah, sort of a drummer by trade. That's the only instrument I can really claim to be able to play. But as far as recording and getting an interest in how records were made, I think that spark came from sitting in front of the speaker in my folks' living room, listening to these Queen records, and trying to go, how do they do that? And there are a lot of really strong influences, but I specifically remember, because you listen to Bohemian Rhapsody and you're like, there's only 4 guys. How is that possible? And so that sort of sparked my interest. And once I had been playing for a while and had actually been in the studio and recorded, I knew from that moment on that I wanted to make records. I wanted to record albums. That was what I really wanted to do. It took me a really long time to get to the point where I could do that. But I knew since I was really young that that's ultimately what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to get there. my path was very divergent. I'm sure everybody's path is completely different. But I don't have any formal education in audio engineering. No, I take that back. I had one class my freshman year of college that was actually part of the jazz program at Western Michigan, where I started school. And that just cemented the deal. Got my first whiff of 2-inch tape. And I went, I want to be here all the time. This is where I want to be.
Yeah.
But it was a long time before I managed to make it happen.
What was your major in college?
Political science, which certainly gives you a nice, well-rounded education about the world. College was really for my parents. I mean, you know.
You and I both.
Yeah, the whole, you know, you're told.
And they'll see this.
Yeah. You're going to go to college. And I actually really enjoyed the subject and had set up to be able to working towards teaching history and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was busy trying to be a rock star, playing drums in a band.
Takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of energy.
And when after I graduated, I was pursuing music full time, and I was also a mechanic and a body man on cars. That was the flexible day gig that allowed me to do that kind of stuff, because it's I could go on the road for a couple of weeks, come back, and if that shop didn't need me anymore, there'd be another one down the street.
Right.
It's just one of those things that if you kind of know what you're doing and you're not a complete and total fuck up. Can I say that?
Absolutely.
If you're not a complete and total fuck up, you can get a job fixing cars. So that's what I was doing, and then you know, driving around the Southeast in a van with a bunch of guides, a bunch of dudes playing clubs, and I guess it was probably 1993 or 4 when the last really serious group that I was in broke up. It was probably 93. And at that point, I kind of said, okay, maybe it's not for me. And at that point, I was also gone from fixing cars to, they made me a manager, because once again, if you know how to do it and you're not a complete fuck up, they'll eventually make you the manager.
Blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Right.
And sort of progressed through that. And then 3 or 4 years later, I had a job opportunity to go to this really big major body shop that serviced a whole bunch of dealerships. And it offered a lot of money to me at that time. Like, it was a huge jump in salary. And I realized I couldn't do it. Because if I took that job, that's what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. I just had that feeling. I knew it. And, you know.
What was that, mid-20s for you, or?
No. So, let's see. I was 30 when I opened my first studio. If I have one regret, it's that I didn't get into it earlier, because I always knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't know how to get there, and I didn't really have any mentors, or, you know, I couldn't figure out a way to get from A to B. But I had this opportunity when I decided to not take this job in 96. And we had a home loan, which I could not have gotten without that regular job, but that was already done and passed. So I basically said, my wife supporting me the whole time, saying, "You always wanted to be in a recording studio, make records." I was like, "Well, yeah." He said, "You should do that." And first of all, I love you, honey. And second, it was like, well, if I'm ever going to do this, ever, I got to do it now. Because I was 30 years old. I didn't have much money, but we were stable enough that I could go borrow, I think I started off with $20,000, which back then actually bought you a hell of a lot less than it buys you today.
Right. You started on tape at that, or was it DAT?
It was ADATs.
Okay.
And a Behringer console.
Okay.
The console was actually pretty decent. That was back when they were still made in Germany, I think. ADATs were horrible. I had to keep 5 so that I'd have 3 working at any one time.
Jeez.
Anybody that's had to deal with them, there's no love lost there.
I'm thankful. I missed that by 10 or 20 years.
And I had done analog tape recording as well. I couldn't afford a decent analog tape machine.
Yeah.
So that's started off very humbly. I converted. There was a small addition on my house, and I spent, I'd say, a good 6 months doing nothing but reading and doing research about recording, acoustics, studio design, all of this stuff. Because once again, I didn't really have anybody to go to. I just got a hold of everything I could get my hands on, and I built my first studio, which began initially as just one room, then eventually became 2 rooms, and upstairs where the control room was, and the downstairs where the tracking was. But yeah, all the acoustic treatments, all that stuff, I made by myself using, some other people's plans and some ideas that I had. And I just sort of jumped in with both feet. Now, I did have the luck of having some talented friends that I could call on to be guinea pigs. And so, because the material is so important, starting off with decent songs and a decent singer is a really big bonus.
Performance.
Yeah, but I'm definitely a learned by doing it sort of thing. My first few records were really shitty, but they got better.
Makes me feel better.
Well, you know what? The worst thing that can happen to a beginning engineer, in my opinion, is that one of their really early records sounds good and they get a lot of positive response from it, but they don't know what they were doing. So they will spend the next 5 years trying to figure out what they did, chasing something that by the time they caught up to it was not really appropriate anymore. Because every day when you walk in the studio, even if it's the same band, it's different every day. Every time you sit down at the console, it's different. The microphones are different. The placement is different. The sunlight is different. How drunk the band is different, So you have to really understand the fundamentals of how stuff works, and then you can really steadily improve. That was the thing that I stuck by. I'm very glad that I did. So
that's cool. Let's
So if your first few records suck, that's okay.
Right.
If you have a really good sounding record early on, don't count on it. You have to go in every day thinking, I got to listen, I have to react to what's happening, and I have to learn a little bit every time. I still learn something new every session I do. Swear to God. I mean, every session,
Yeah.
I get something. And even if it's just, a slight difference in the angle of a mic or, matching mics or combining mics of different patterns together, learning where different parts of the room, because it's really all about the space that you're recording in. A lot of people don't, because they don't necessarily have access to a great space. But it is, there are some things that you can do very well in your bedroom or your garage, because the tools are very, very powerful these days. But you can't stick a 19-piece big band in your bedroom or your garage. And even if you could, it would sound terrible. So you have to have a really good acoustically balanced room. One of the main reasons why I came over here when Michael asked me and I saw the plans was it was a chance to really work in a world-class room. And I thought that the only way that was going to happen was I was going to have to move, which I didn't want to do because I like it here.
You're a North Carolina native.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, no, I've lived here long enough to be a local, but I'm not a native. So I kind of grew up in the D.C. area.
D.C., that's right.
Yeah, and I went to college.
Michigan.
Yeah. I went to college at Western Michigan.
Okay.
For half the time, and then my folks moved to North Carolina, and so I became in-state Carolina and out-of-state Michigan. So I just transferred to NC State. Go Wolfpack. Finished up college, and actually when I moved here and I got to Raleigh, it was like, this is home. It felt like home.
Yeah.
It was, and it really turned out to be. I mean, until I moved to be closer to this studio, I lived in an area about 2 miles across from 1987 to 2014. So all through college, post-college, marriage, all that other stuff. Buying a house, starting a studio. It was all in this area, in that area. You know the area. It's down near the Krispy Kreme.
Yeah.
Downtown Raleigh.
Yeah, it's by Peace.
Yeah. It's a great old neighborhood,
Gotcha.
basically. I really like Pittsburgh, but Raleigh's still always going to be my hometown, I think. Mm-hmm. Spent more time there. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah. So that's how I ended up in North Carolina from Michigan. I went to Western Michigan starting off as a music major, and I was a terrible music major.
Were you there for percussion?
Yeah, percussion performance, and I couldn't hack it. I don't have the temperament or the discipline to practice 4 to 6 hours a day, and you have to, if you're going to swim in those waters. It's very competitive. Mm-hmm. And essentially it was kind of ruining what music was for me. So I floundered for a couple of years before I found political science. I was still playing all the time.
Right.
As a matter of fact, even though I wasn't a music major, a number of the jazz ensembles wanted me to stay and keep playing with them. So I did. Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play. I really did not want to spend the kind of time that you need to if you're going to be a professional percussionist. Because, let alone any particular instrument, you also have all of the keyboard instruments, all of the tuned percussion. I mean, it's just, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a month on the triangle. I'm kidding. But it's really broad. And once again, I'm a terrible student. So I figured that out pretty quickly. Also, all the music majors that I were around, they were all assholes. They were just, I don't know. I think it's because of the competitive nature of it.
Is it the personalities?
Personalities. I mean, just
egotistical or just temperamental.
I also think that sometimes, no matter who it is, anybody that is like really in deep in a very specific area, can't communicate outside of their very small area.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like, I don't like these people. So there was a win-win.
Yeah.
And that was actually where I had my first real studio experience. I played in bands all through high school, and all that other stuff. But they had this one class, because Western Michigan had they had a recording studio that was set up so that one side of it looked into their big performance hall, and the other side of it was like a small studio. So they recorded performances and that sort of thing. And there was a class, Introduction to Recording. And I took it, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is it. I immediately called my dad, and I said, Dad, I need to borrow some money. I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
He was like, no. I only need $250,000. And back then, that was like the minimum sort of entry to play the game at all, let alone the structure, because this was before modular digital multitrack. So you had to, if you were going to be a pro, you had to have a 2-inch analog tape machine. That's a minimum of, at the time, anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. And there weren't Mackie consoles around at the time. It just, the gear has changed a lot from my first experience to what I've worked with over the years, and sort of what I work with now, I guess.
It's so beautiful.
It is.
It just never gets old.
No,
never gets old. I've been walking in this place for years now, and it just does. And the smell, the wood.
Yeah, the wood and all that. With all this gear on, it's that ionized air.
Yeah.
I just realized the console isn't on. This is a major faux pas.
I was going to say something, but
why didn't you?
I don't know.
All right.
I'm still in the intern mindset.
Actually, yeah.
Remember? Hey, remember? Don't speak unless spoken to.
Yeah, right.
And you're a fly on the wall. If you have any questions, ask me later.
Good student. See, you are a good student.
He scared the hell out of me. I'm telling you, man, ingrained.
Anybody,
I still have that sensory memory from being here, and
somebody that doesn't sort of give you that cold splash of water truth when you first start is not doing you any favors. You're better off to get walloped first before you have a chance to do something really stupid in front of a really big client and never get asked back. So you try to avoid that situation. Joys of interns. You don't get work in this business because of where you went to school or if you went to school. It's all based on your work. What you live or die based on your last record. That's what matters. And the personality and all that other stuff, but it's like I knew a lot of people who went to those schools thinking that they were going to be able to come out of this and find an entry-level job. This is back in the 90s.
Yeah.
They could make a lot of promises. And then they immediately found out that no matter who you are, no matter where you went to school or how long you were in school, you start by emptying the trash cans. Because working in a studio, if you are part of the studio infrastructure, not just engineering a project, but part of the studio infrastructure. There's all this knowledge that you need to know. A lot of it's managing personalities. What I tell a lot of people that are interested in interning is that I explain it like this. You'll be taking out the trash. If you do that really well, maybe I'll let you clean the bathrooms. If you do that really well, maybe I'll send you out to get lunch. If you do that really well, maybe I'll send you out to the music store to get guitar strings. And what it is it's a building of trust, levels of trust. And does the person have problem-solving skills? Engineers, by definition, are problem solvers.
Well, can take that off my list. Because that was one thing that you told me back in my internship, and that stuck with me.
The problem solvers. Yeah, I mean,
mixing is just problem solving. Engineering is just problem solving.
Or if it's not just that, it's a big part of
the rationale.
Yeah, you have to have some skill and knowledge in problem solving, not just specific things. Sometimes the problem is two guys in the band aren't getting along. Do you let that crash the session? Well, if you find a solution and you say, why don't we do this part and you go get some lunch and you change your strings and we'll lay this down and then we'll get back and we'll try it again. Solving a problem. Just do a little pressure, a little friction there, chance to sort of break it up, get back together. Everybody's happy. So, I mean, solving problems goes
beyond
everything from
technical.
Everything from diagnosing a problem in the console or beating the Pro Tools computer with a bat. All of that is problem solving. Well, maybe not beating with a bat, but that just feels good.
There's always 49 millimeters and
no guns in the studio. But yeah, so that's how I got started. I built my first studio in '97 and just jumped in. I didn't have any professional experience when I built that studio. And the first 3 or 4 years operating that studio, I was also working for a sound company, which I think is a really good thing to do if you are thinking about working in a studio, because live sound production, it is a very different thing, but it teaches you to work fast. Mm-hmm. It does help with problem solving because you've got to trace down something that's giving you a problem, and you learn things that are not completely applicable to a recording studio, but you learn a lot about how things work.
Having flashbacks to when we had Carl Palmer, and we were doing. I don't know what
that was so weird. I mean, he was so stadium rock, but the dude came by it honestly. I mean, he played stadiums. So, but it was just really kind of funny to see this gigantic stadium rock drum set with 2 gongs. Was it 2 gongs? I think it was 2.
I think we'd have to go back to. I'll have to check my Instagram from 2016.
And so we had to, we had all of this sound reinforcement in a room that doesn't need any reinforcing, but that was just sort of on his rider. Right. So it was loud. That was a bizarro session. It came out fine. Well, he was a nice guy.
I got to mic Carl Palmer's drum kit.
Yes, you did. You did.
That was.
You could probably even say that you mic'd his gongs.
Woo!
I wasn't going to mic them, but his live sound tech says, no, you have to mic the gongs. I'm like, dude, do you see the size of this room? You did not need to put mics on gongs.
Didn't we? How did we? We had to do a split snake.
Yeah. So we used the splitter,
They were live, and we were coming into the API.
Yeah, it was a splitter snake, so that he could do whatever he needed to do out there, and I would have completely uninterrupted signal in here, or not compromised signal.
Sounded great in here. It was crazy because we could go here live and then just come through the two doors, and it was just like, what, totally different experience, but sounded amazing.
It's sort of like it is sort of, that's one of my favorite things is to sort of experience that and go, that's why we make records. It's a different experience.
Totally different.
It's a different facet of the art. Performance and seeing live performances, and mixing live shows. Mixing live shows is a very difficult skill. But like what I said, it teaches you to work fast.
I've got a question for you. When it comes to live versus studio, I've done a lot of live in the past, just for a few gigs here and there.
Sure,
but I'm a studio guy.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Low end live feels like you can get away with a lot more in the sense of there's more of it. And one of the things earlier on when I was learning in the studio was it definitely took a few years to really get that low end tamed, controlled, not overbearing. And it's a totally, totally different balancing act.
Well, think of it this way.
So your thoughts,
So when you're mixing a live show, you have in front of you all of the variables. You know what speakers people are going to be listening to. You know what the room is going to do. You know the instruments on the stage. Nobody's going to be listening to this live performance other than the people that are there. You follow me? So what you're doing doesn't have to translate to a bunch of different playback devices. See? So you just do it, whatever you need to do for just that space.
For there.
And there are lots of challenges in that. Managing bottom end in a bad sounding room is a nightmare.
Managing any frequency spectrum and jeez. That 3K
they're fundamentally, I don't say fundamentally different goals, but it's the approach is fundamentally different.
Yes.
It's easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy. It's easier to make a good sounding record if everybody comes in here and listens to it on these speakers, the speakers that I mix it on. It's a lot harder to record and mix a record that sounds good everywhere.
iPhone mono speaker.
Yeah.
Woo.
And these days, it better sound okay.
Yeah.
I don't specifically mix for computer speakers. I know a lot of guys do. I sort of fight the earbud thing. Maybe I'm just a little old-fashioned, but I've tried to mix with headphones and earbuds and can make it sound great on headphones and earbuds, playing back in a speaker, and it just sounds like, what the hell is that? But if I mix it on speakers, it'll generally sound good on headphones or earbuds.
Right.
Because there's things that you can get away with earbuds.
What do you think is the biggest challenge now with the Web 2.0 generation? Specifically, a lot of people listening to music on buds now. What do you think is the main challenge?
Well, I would say the challenge is always that if we're talking about mixing, that it needs to be able to translate well to a bunch of different playback devices.
Do you see like a reoccurring problem that keeps happening with engineers, or?
Well, there is a slight reoccurring problem with clients who only listen to music on their earbuds.
Gotcha.
And they want it to sound good on their earbuds. And you can make it sound good on their earbuds, but they won't necessarily sound good on anybody else's earbuds. or if it's being played back in a club, or if it's being broadcast on radio, or if they're playing the CD in their car. You know, it's sort of like, that's the magic of a good mixer, is not only squeezing every bit of goodness out of the music, but also, will anybody listening to this on any playback device get what the song is about?
And I want to throw something else at you. So with that being said, making decision making in that whole process, because when I go back to the records that I love, and I think the ones that you love as well, you go back, you listen to Bohemian Rhapsody or one of those. Let's take Queen for example.
Yeah.
There's moments where, and it translates well on pretty much anything.
Mm-hmm.
But you go back and your experience changes. Like, wow, the drums are actually pretty quiet during that solo. Oh wow, that guitar solo is like freaking. The RMS on that is higher than anything else.
It's a completely different experience. There's this change from about the mid '80s on. I went back and a friend of my wife found a really good, clean LP of Captain Fantastic, and I listened to the vinyl. It's an entirely different experience, and it's not the vinyl that's doing it. It's just the way things were mixed then was much more dynamic. There was not this, this sort of uniformity, loud pumping sound, because that's what the radio station did. They compressed it for broadcast.
Right.
And it was like listening to a completely different record. Like there are places where the conga is the loudest thing in the mix, and you're like, I never noticed that before, but yeah, it's making the song go.
It's like Night of the Opera. The first track, "Death on Two Legs," comes to mind. The guitar solos are just, when they come and scream about halfway in, and you look at even just visually looking at the stereo and the RMS on it, it's just like those things are saturated to hell.
See, so here's the thing.
I love it.
Yeah, here's the thing.
It's disgusting, but it's beautiful.
Right. Here's one of the major changes, I think, in engineering and learning how to engineer and record music. And it's hard. You have to learn to not listen with your eyes. Those guys weren't looking at anything than the meters on the console.
Right.
If it sounds good, it is good. That's the only rule that I have.
That's it.
That, and interns must always know the location of my glasses at any given moment. Because I lose them constantly. But yeah, that is the rule. If it sounds good, it is good. It doesn't matter if it's a Radio Shack microphone.
Right.
It works or it doesn't.
Right.
And I find a lot of even really sort of somewhat accomplished engineers spending time making pretty pictures on the screen and not necessarily really listening to what they're doing. The guys at the top are still moving faders. They're not drawing lines. There's a humanity there that makes that special. There's just too much precision to be had. And I personally think it sort of has changed popular music in that it's much less about performances and much more about how it's assembled. I'm just talking about pop music right now.
I
There's still lots of music that is performed. It's just not in the pop genre now, and Lord knows I spent a decade making Lego records, is what I call them. You have blocks of audio and you just, But you know, I had a pretty major moment when I was working on that Roomful of Blues record.
Mm-hmm.
That one was nominated.
Yeah.
And spent a day and a half setting up because everything was live. Everything. Piano, organ, 3 horns, drums, bass, guitar, singer, harmonica. Crammed into a pretty small space.
Was the singer isolated?
The singer was about the only thing that was... Oh, singer and the... So the singer was in a booth and the 3 horns were in a booth.
Okay.
Everything else was out there. Actually, no. I had the Leslie in the hallway. I did have that. And I had one of the guitar amps in the lounge. But it worked because it was all about performances. But getting all of that set up and doing the sound check and then just hearing them play, and it comes back and it sounds like a record. Not a recording, a record. And you're like, this is what I want. I want to be able to inspire a great performance and capture it when it happens.
Right.
Because that's a much bigger challenge than manufacturing. I'm not saying that there isn't just as much creativity involved in sort of manufactured music, but it's a different challenge to sort of try to capture the moment. And interesting story. The first take of the first song that we recorded for that record was the title track of the album. The first thing that I hit record for after just, you know, sound checking levels and it's like, okay, everybody ready? 2, 3, 4, boom. That was the title track of the record. And from that point on, I knew that I was becoming more interested in performed music than assembled music.
Right.
You know,
right.
The thing that happens when there's a musical conversation because people are playing at the same time. You know, if I go in and lay down my part, and then you go in and lay down your part, the musical conversation is only one direction. You can only respond to what I've already done. If we go in there together, that conversation is real. It's two-way. I'm going to react to you. You're going to react to me. That's where the magic lives. In my opinion.
I agree.
That's really where the stuff of, you know, where did that come from? You know, the magic that you can catch in the studio, as opposed to, you know, building things carefully constructed. And all this to say is that is what ultimately led me to leave Osceola and to come here. Osceola was a great studio. I'd been there for 10 years. I was a partner in the business. But I really couldn't make those kind of records in that kind of space. You know, it just, I needed a room. I needed a big room. And this is after I'd already had a chance to do a session in Abbey Road, Studio 2, the Beatles room, and at Sony.
No big deal.
No big deal. And a session at Sony. So I had been in some real rooms, and I was like, yeah. This is what I want to do. I mean, because I had a very solid client base, very comfortable living, but this was a chance to sort of take a very big leap and a very steep learning curve to help put this together. I mean, I was only here for the last year and a half of construction, but a huge team working on it. But some of my bigger influences were choosing the outboard gear, microphones, doing the systems integration, getting all of these things working together. And this place is networked out the yin yang. I mean, it's just everything can go everywhere. And it's as future-proof as we could make it at the time.
Right.
So I had a very steep learning curve because I knew jack about video. So all of a sudden I had to learn about what are the different video formats, why do I need video ref and video black, and why do I need, what's the difference between the frame rates, and how do I set this up with my audio clock.
Yep.
And then you have clocking, timing, and sync, right? Clocking is your digital clock.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's just clocking and sync. But sync is managing to keep all of these devices working together, like SMPTE or MIDI time clock. So location, that sort of thing. And figuring out what we were going to need and how we were going to implement it was a pretty big challenge for me. And, I didn't know what I was doing. Shh. Michael, you're not hearing this. But I learned. I taught myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a little comforting to know that, 8 years later or whatever, the decisions I made really were good ones. We made
damn good ones.
We got some things wrong, but man, we got an awful lot right.
Yeah. Well, working with the big names.
Okay, what about them?
Let's talk about it for a little bit.
Most people are really cool. My experience has been that there aren't many people that get to where they are by being a jerk. Now, there's a difference between being a jerk and being very specific and demanding. Very high expectations. I work with a lot of clients that have very high expectations. And I'm fine with that. I love a client who knows what they want, and demands really good results. Once again, that's the challenge.
Right.
That's the hard part.
Right.
As opposed to, somebody who doesn't really know what they want, but has enough knowledge to be irritating, trying to help you get it, and they're not helping. But in general, it really is about relationships and people, and how you manage, artistic egos, creative people think differently. They react differently. God knows I'm weird. It's just sort of like...
If you're weird, I'm crazy.
Probably.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places that could go.
Yeah.
So there's only sort of like one time really when I had kind of a big fanboy moment and had to sort of, and it's not who you would expect, but it was Bela Fleck. Because those early records were a huge influence on me, those early Flecktones records. Especially, that was before I got into making records, but it was when that interest was really driving me.
Right.
How are they doing that?
Right.
And so getting a chance to make a record with him, it didn't last more than about 15 minutes, but I walked in there and there's his banjo. That's the axe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, John McLaughlin's guitar was pretty cool too. But it's really funny. Some people who you'd think would sort of distract you, but don't, because they're just like normal people. One of the weirdest encounters I ever had was with James Taylor. And hand to God, this is what happened. We're sound checking. I'm sitting in here, and I literally say, that guy sounds just like James Taylor. In my mind, I'm going, phew. But he has such a unique way of playing the acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
So it's not like just a good sounding guitar. Instantaneously, it's like, he sounds just like James Taylor. Oh my God, he is. It's so stupid. But I like sharing that just because it's sort of like, you know, you never know what's going to sort of catch you off guard.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Some 14-year-old kid comes in and, you know, plays the piano like Leonard Bernstein. I mean, it's just, you just don't know. You really don't. You can usually tell the assholes in the first 15 minutes.
Can you go over, you can keep anonymity, but best and worst recording experiences, if you had one of each? So I'm sure you've got a plethora
I've had a lot of great ones. I've had a couple of bad ones. You know, I had one that was, you know, just horrible. But I mean, it was not, you know, a famous artist or even a serious artist. I won't mention any names, but
sure.
It just, the session was a shit show, but it didn't end there. Woo! He insisted on dropping a handwritten note off at my boss's house. The guy completely off his rocker. I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
But that was probably one of the worst. I have a couple that were really, really difficult. There was one with this group from Africa. This is interesting because this was a real challenge. They're from 7 different African nations. They were 13 or 14 people. There were 6 or 7 different languages.
Cheers.
And sometimes things would have to be translated from English to French to whatever. And, you know, that's a lot of moving parts. A very sort of complex music thing. And then you take the whole communication thing and add that, and it's, wow, it was a real challenge.
Right.
It was a major accomplishment when we both agreed what that meant.
Yeah.
Because I would say, so do you like that take? And they would say, you like that take? I said, no, do you like that take? You like that take? Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Then it was pretty good. Right. So exactly. At that point we got to, and if it was really good,
all right.
You know, it was funny and challenging, and I also really long days, and I also got like really sick one night in the middle of the session. I mean, at home when it came in.
Yeah.
And I was really running on fumes, just trying to get through it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the more challenging sessions.
Reminds me of when I was on set in New York for a film, major motion picture in China, and I was one of the American actors in the American rock band, you know. And I mean, we filmed for a whole week. Great crew, great everything. But the translation was difficult at times because a majority of the crew and a majority of the actors were from China, and it's like
and add on top of that how difficult it is to talk about music and talk about sound.
Yes.
Not everybody has exactly the same thing in their mind of what shiny means. And how you translate that across a couple of languages.
Yeah.
And you'd get back something like it's dusty. I'm like, oh, what the hell does dusty mean? Yeah, I mean, so
right.
Trying to work all this out, and it wasn't a music that I was totally unfamiliar with, but I hadn't done an ensemble that big. The entire big room was nothing but percussion. There were 5 percussionists, all playing at the same time.
Right.
Anyway, that was a challenging session. They're fun because if you do manage to make it through, and the day ends good, there's a lot of hugging and high fiving, like woo,
and thumbs up,
and thumbs up. But they can be challenging in a lot of different ways. I've certainly had plenty of sessions where something really critical broke,
right,
or was not functioning correctly, or was being intermittent, and those are it's just going to happen.
Right.
Recording studios, stuff breaks.
Right.
I think at one point while we were under construction, I calculated the number of soldered connections in this building. It's over 7,000. 7,000. They're not all perfect. And then when you find one, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow,
well,
so you're talking about film.
Yeah.
So I've recently
5.1.
Yeah. So I had I love mixing in surround. I've done some experiments mixing just music in surround, pretty much just for my own enjoyment. It's a hard thing to talk an artist into doing because it is a longer process, and there really isn't a good way to release it. Although I have a teeny bit of hope now that it might happen, because with all the streaming that's going on, why couldn't you just stream your album? Everybody's listening to it on a home theater anyway. You don't need a special playback device.
Right.
Imagine a streaming service that had concerts mixed in 5.1, or albums mixed in 5.1 for like a real listening experience.
The concert would seem to me the most applicable.
Yes, that's the easy one.
Right.
In the sense that the surround mixing is more in the form of artist in front of you, and the surround becomes more a sense of space. And you can do some stuff, but unless it's Pink Floyd, you're not going to send stuff, the guitar solo to the rear corner. But I really enjoy it, and I just recently got the chance to mix a feature-length film in 5.1 that was very score heavy. So I mixed all of the music in surround as well. So it's not just the film was in surround for things that were moving and that sort of stuff. I mixed the music so that it was like part of the sound design.
Right.
So like the flute might actually start back here, and the entire mix would build across the back, and then boom. And it's an incredibly amazing thing to experience. I had so much fun doing it.
Are you a fan of David Lynch?
Sure. Yeah, I'd mix a Lynch film.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he's probably. I mean, when I think of just some of whether it's Twin Peaks or any of the films that he did.
A lot of his stuff is whoever his music supervisor is, or the person who is choosing the music, is brilliant.
I mean, you go from Rammstein to some of the. It's just like he's all over the place.
Yeah,
but they're just perfect placements.
Yes,
you know. Not to digress, but
no.
You talk about sound design. David Lynch is the first one that comes to mind for me.
And I mean, I learned so much working on this film.
Yeah.
And that, like, sound design is not just the whooshy sound as the spaceship goes over. Sound design also includes any Foley. It includes enhancements to what you see, but you don't really hear. And the sound just sort of expands your experience, like walking from a hallway into a big hall in a stone castle. Just adding this little bit of a all of a sudden, it was like, wow, that's a completely different experience.
Did you find, was it more of enhancing what was already there, captured audio-wise, or was it creating, or was it a combination? I mean, I'm sure it's a combination of both.
You know,
giving it what it needs.
Yeah.
Until it's just right.
A lot of it is, having to enhance or repair or replace or make something sort of hyper real for certain moments in the film. So the sound design is everything from, the person that sort of creates the sonic palette for a movie. Like, using a science fiction one is kind of easy to understand. It's sort of like, okay, this is the way our laser sounds. This is the way the ship sounds. All that stuff has to be designed and planned.
Right.
But there's also, what are the background sounds? What happens when a door opens? What happens when these guys are walking, but it doesn't sound like they're walking in boots? We have to make them sound like they're walking in boots. So it's a fascinating area that I'm interested in, but talk about getting into the weeds. I don't know that I would want to take that on.
You sound excited about it, though.
Yeah. Well, I just learned a lot about film mixing, and I enjoyed it. It was an enormous amount of work. Imagine spending 3.5 weeks mixing something. Well, film is an hour and 40 minutes long, and it's
actually sounds like
everything that you hear is going through my hands. Every door squeak, every dialogue, every sound effect, every Foley step, door close. Then there's the score, the music.
Sounds pretty quick, 3.5 weeks. I mean,
well, major motion pictures. I don't know if they take longer, but so one of the things I learned is that there is a division of labor that happens
heavily,
on big,
heavily,
and that's how you get a big major motion picture to be mixed in, I don't know how long, but
right.
There is the dialogue editor, the dialogue engineer, the dialogue mixer, sound design engineer, creator, mixer, music score, mixer, editor. There's at least five guys. Anytime you see a picture of what looks like a movie theater and there's this giant console in the middle of it, that's called a dub stage.
Right.
And that's where they take all of the different elements from the movie and it's all balanced down to stereo or surround or whatever the format is. And so you have different people focusing on different areas. And then there's still the one guy in the middle, or no, he's not always in the middle, but he's called the re-recording mixer, who is the guy who takes what these other engineers balance and creates and balances them together. So it's sort of like they're creating the stems, and then the re-recording mixer is the guy who just assembles the final product.
So left and right or 5 to 1 or...
Well, just, taking all of the elements and making the mix.
Right.
So you have people that are working on the elements and handing some pre-mixed stuff to the final mixer, and if there's something he doesn't like, they go back and do it again and send it to him again.
Right.
So now I know why when you see audio credits on a film, it's like... Because, a lot of the smaller independent films, I just did everything, by myself. There wasn't any money. And this was my first film that I've worked on where there was a sound designer and there was a dialogue editor, and there were 2 composers. Anyway, crazy story. Film just premiered last week, and very positive reviews. So
cool.
Excited because I hadn't even had a chance to hear it in the theater yet. And you know how particular Michael is, and I couldn't sleep. And the first theater that they played it in was just some old theater with hard walls and just like some PA speakers glued up there. And I was like, oh no. and he said, well, as soon as I could hear the reflections off of the back wall, I decided I couldn't judge anything based on that. I was like, thank you. He said, and then the next theater was sort of like a large metroplex, multiplex.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one after that was like a smaller multiplexes. And he said in both of those rooms, it sounded amazing. He doesn't say that very often. So that made me happy.
You
and
can sleep again.
what's kind of interesting is that there are all of these different formats for film. You mix things different for big theaters, like 1,000, 2,000 people, for medium-sized theaters, 500-seat theaters, and your average multiplex, 200 seats, mm-hmm. and then home theater. And you have to not scope out. You have to what's the word I'm thinking of? You have to set the room for these different environments.
Right.
The volume levels that you're listening to, because in a big theater, the speakers are a lot farther away from you. And, because of the inverse square law, that every time you double the distance, you lose 3 dB.
Right. So,
and tonality changes. And now you're going to put the speakers behind the screen. Anyway, that was a bit of a learning curve. And what I was getting to was that I had chosen to mix it for the small theater and home theater, thinking that was its most likely designation. Mm-hmm. Because they could always step it up if they want to. And it sounded the best in the small theater, which was like, it worked.
Right.
It was like, I followed the instructions and it worked.
Right.
Like you have to calibrate. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
You have to calibrate the room for film. And it's sort of like, you don't touch the volume knob. It's a very weird thing.
Right.
Because the idea ultimately is that you are hearing what the audience hears exactly, and you're just mixing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all these volume targets that you have to hit, and
right.
all these different specs for deliverables.
-10 sometimes for TV, right? Is that a
no,
thing?
it's okay. So there's this new thing called LUFS or LKUFS, which is a way of measuring average perceived volume. It's a new sort of metering thing that sort of came out when they had that all that big stuff about commercials being too loud. And so by doing this, you have these targets you have to hit so that the average for the entire film hits these windows. So you can have really loud moments and really quiet moments, but the average is consistent. That way, no matter what theater it's played in, the relationships will stay the same.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that because of that, now streaming sounds a lot better. You don't have to compress things like you used to. You don't have to limit things like you used to with CDs, because if your shit is too loud on the streaming service, they will turn it down.
Or if it's too low, they'll give you a little bit more, which I'm noticing.
Right. Yeah. So what their idea is to sort of function as a radio station, meaning keeping the average between songs listenable.
Yeah.
Which
it's funny
is
that you bring
cool.
that up. Yeah.
It's kind of encouraging because you can mix. You can mix more dynamically and have really acceptable results because not everybody's just listening to it on the CD.
Right.
Well, that's a hard habit to break. Then again, you have mixing for YouTube, which is yet another.
That's a whole other.
That's more like mixing for CD.
Right.
But anyhow.
Let's talk real quick about tracking versus mixing.
Okay.
Analog, a lot of stuff you can bake before it hits, especially with the hybrid system that you and I both use.
Sure.
The possibilities are endless, but as far as you're concerned, when you're tracking these days, are you doing more baking? Are you adding stuff later? What's your flow usually if you're doing a standard 4 or 5 piece band and you want to get a good floor sound?
So it sort of varies depending on the kind of music. I generally track with as little compression and EQ as I can. That being said, you have to have really good circuits going down for it to work.
Right.
That's why we have this much invested in outboard gear.
Right. So you'll make
I work sort of a bunch of different ways. One way is to, if I have a really good picture of what it's supposed to be, beforehand, like I've worked with the band, I'm producing the band, I know where we're going with it, then I will go ahead and commit to some things, to certain colors strongly. Whereas many times I leave enough flexibility that I can take it a bunch of different directions.
Early on.
Right. Maybe I'm tracking and just maybe if I'm compressing something, just taking off the top 3 dB. Just really light things that make it a little easier to mix later on. But I've been finding you can get 2 really good sounds out of this console because it's a dual fader console, and this would be your level to tape. But every time it goes through the channel, it's a transformer. So if I patch the mic pre straight to the input, I'm just going through the transfer of the mic pre. If I go from mic pre to this channel to the tape, I'm going through 2 transformers.
It adds.
And it's sort of like, wow. So when I track drums, I patch it straight. Backing guitars, I go through the extra transformer. Vocals, extra transformer.
Just to give it that little push.
It's just a blurry. It's just, you lose some of the transients, some of the really fast transients, but you get warmth. And
any of that mid range,
yeah,
it helps.
Like, all this outboard gear was chosen because it does stuff that this console does not. So, there's a lot of tube gear, and stuff that quite often considered more, some stuff is more mastering than actually tracking and mixing. But that's because when I'm mixing in analog, I kind of want to be able to output that level.
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Other than time. I adore mixing on this API. It just sounds magnificent. But it's not the right choice for everything. And quite often it's not the right choice. Well, it could be not the right choice sonically, but it could also be not the right choice for workflow. When you're mixing on an analog console and somebody says, I want to do a tweak, it's not just opening up the session, bumping the vocal a half a dB and running another thing. You're going to remix the song.
Recall.
So, right. Recall on this beast is fader, mute, and switches. That's it. So you have to keep really intense notes, not to mention all the outboard gear that you're doing. So one of the hybrid ways I work is that when I am mixing on this desk, I print lots of stems.
Right. Right.
So I have like the bass and drum stem, and I have the guitar stem, and I have the key stem, and I have the horn stem, and the vocal stem.
Because God forbid, you know what I mean?
God forbid,
it's like,
so, that gives you some flexibility to do some stuff later on. I don't think there's anything that sounds really better than mixing on a big analog desk. However, the digital workflow is faster. It's completely recallable. Now the Pro Tools is 32-bit. It sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
The plugins sound a lot better.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really help you with tracking.
Right.
Doesn't help you at all with tracking. So that's where this stuff comes in. And this is, the plugins generally emulate very well, but they're still not. Maybe it's because my tube tech is not the one that was modeled. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It could be just a difference between models. I mean,
I don't know. There's a body that's missing.
There's a Pultec model that sounds pretty amazing, and it's basically doing the same thing, but it doesn't sound like that. And I don't know if that's just because of that one, or if it's something it was modeled. Who knows? Fuck, I don't know.
Biggest difference because I put some more analog into my setup. Yeah, man, it's just you're getting so much more. You're just getting more. I don't know how else to describe it, but
it's the sound of wires.
Yeah,
and it's quite literally, no joke, it's quantum fluctuation. It's electrons moving down wires. There's randomness there. And that randomness can quite often be a little certain something. The only way I can put it is I would say that it makes my ears smile.
Right.
And that randomness can be a really cool thing. In the digital world, there is no randomness. So good, bad, I don't know. Just, they're just two slightly different things. I certainly have no qualms mixing in the digital world. I don't particularly like mixing completely within the box, but that is primarily because I like to have a decent physical interface. Like I'd like to try one of those S6s. I think that would be pretty cool. We currently have a digital console, the Harrison digital console over there. That is very high resolution. It's 48-bit fixed. And it sounds great, and it gives me, I'm actually mixing on the console.
Right.
So I'll actually do, no matter what I'm doing, I'll be doing some things in Pro Tools and some things out here. Like rule number 1, if it sounds good, it is good. I don't care where it's coming from.
Print it.
Yeah. And the cool thing about, having something on, especially the really weird, crazy stuff, doing that in Pro Tools is great, because if you decide later you don't want to do that, you don't have to you can back your way out of it.
Right. Decisions.
Yeah,
it's
right. The older I get, the more... It's interesting. I was just thinking about this the other day.
You taking more risks, or...
So
the sleeves are coming up.
I have two different. You're good at this, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So 2 things. I'm tracking with a lot less compression than I used to.
Ooh.
And I'm trying to use as little compression as I can get away with. That being said, I'm much more confident grabbing an EQ and doing something crazy going down to the recording.
So committing with EQ.
Yeah.
Just be weird with it.
Primarily because I have some really good EQs.
Well, yeah, the Pultex, you got the
API EQs alone are fantastic, and I've got that massive passive, the GML. So when I am doing something, I don't feel like I'm having to make any compromises. And the thing about the compression is that you can always add it later.
Yep.
But removing it is very difficult, if at all possible.
I've never even attempted to try and...
There are some really interesting downward expander things that sort of...
Right, expansion.
Can sort of uncompress things. As a matter of fact, there's a absolutely amazing plugin by Ozone RX, which is they do all the noise reduction.
Yeah.
They have a de-reverber. And, in small doses, it works really well.
Wow.
It's really amazing. I mean, and those
so
are...
Just doing it from a dynamic standpoint, it's just clipping off whatever.
What it's doing is it's a downward expansion, and you can cue it based on time and threshold and frequency.
Right.
So those frequencies get pushed down at a certain speed and will reduce the ring of the room. Very, very valuable, having to deal with dialogue that's recorded in a lot of different spaces. Not a super musical thing, but all the RX stuff is really, they're really film tools. Very specific noise reduction, and they've got one that is absolutely magic. It's a D mouth noise. I don't think I've ever changed anything from the default. I just run it, and it gets rid of all the sounds.
Well, when you're going through, a C12 or a U47, and you got the open API.
Also a soft singer makes that stuff a lot louder.
Right.
Or if it's dialogue.
Oh, it's dialogue is a whole other.
It's amazing how irritating somebody that has a really dry mouth, kind of like me right now. So every time they open their mouth, it's... So what I was saying, and it's sort of like, I can hit this one button and they're all fixed.
Freebie transients.
Yeah.
Freebies.
Yeah. Unplanned.
Let me get into your future plans real quick, and then we'll go to the
Okay.
the shootout or the popcorn, whatever we want to call it. But
we gotta come up with a good name for it.
it's been that for 20 episodes.
Oh well, shit.
But it's John Custard's been on that. Mel Melton, Jason Adamo. They've all been there. You're next up on the list. But future plans for you. What do you think?
My goal is and has been, since I started making records, was to make records of a certain timeless quality. Mm-hmm. I want to make a record that 25 years from now, people will go back and listen and go, that's a great record. So I tend to not push into fatty sounds that are sort of like very hip right now. I tend to go with sounds that will sort of stand the test of time. But it doesn't matter. Fashion changes. What the 80s did to the snare drum is tragic, but I'm sure it will come back at some point. And like the 70s drum sound was not necessarily great. I like it, but I think that there's sort of a really cool medium space where you have this very organic, sort of dry sound.
I've gone very dry in the last couple of years. Very, very dry.
I'm just all about the deep, thumpy snare drum now. I'm like, poof.
Yeah.
I want it to go poof.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it also just depends on what you're working on. If you're working on a ska record, no.
And the song dictates
absolutely.
so much.
This is the most important thing that any engineer producer could ever learn. That is, the song will tell you what it wants.
They mix themselves almost.
If you record it really well and the song is arranged really well,
right,
they can mix themselves.
Right.
And because the arrangement has a lot to do with it as well as the recording quality. But everything you do should be for the purposes of increasing the whole. Now, how's that for heavy?
Oh, that's great.
It's a cliche, but it's true. It is true.
I mean,
I'm working with a young songwriter right now who I think is utterly brilliant. And we both come from the same school of thought that songs tell me what they want. I listen to them and they tell me.
Yep.
And as soon as I said that, she said, "You're producing my record."
Yep.
Because that's the way that she thinks about it.
Couldn't agree with you more.
And not everybody's going to agree what the song is saying, but it certainly is a great place to start. So you're not trying to force it into something it's not.
Right.
I've certainly found myself having to do that, especially I still do a lot of just mixing. People send me tracks, and I mix them, as just a mixer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, the stuff that you get sent or what the requests are is really turning it into something that it's not, which is a skill also. Mm-hmm. It's its own challenge. But it's like, well, if you wanted that, why didn't you record it like that?
Right.
Yeah, I really want this Les Paul track to sound more like a telly.
Have you heard that before?
Yes.
I was gonna say, because that's just so off the cuff. That's got to be real.
I've heard more reasonable versions of it too. Just like, can you bring some of the sparkly telly sound out of it? I'm like, I can try. It's not going to sound like a Telecaster, but I can make it sound like a bright Les Paul. My favorite story, and this is one that Dick Hodgen tells, and I just use it too.
Was this at Osceola then? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
This guy comes in and he says, "I really want my drums to sound like Kenny Aronoff." And Dick says, no problem. This is really easy. Step one, we get a hold of Kenny Arnoff's drums. Then we call his agent, book him, see if he's free. Then we get Kenny Arnoff to come and play them. And then they will sound just like Kenny Arnoff's drums. Cost you 40, 50 grand.
That's not too bad.
Actually, I don't know what the number would be. But the point, getting that into people's heads.
Right.
This sense of, chicken shit to chicken salad. And I have paid my dues making those records. But they're also really good ways of learning.
Hey, it worked.
It worked. It worked. I faked it pretty good.
Let me ask you this real quick. When you get stuck, if you do still get stuck,
I get stuck every day.
What's for the novice, for somebody just trying to find their way, even with all the YouTube tools, and they can look up anything they want nowadays. And
so I actually think that can cause more damage than good.
Yeah.
And this is an approach that I think is really important and helps to avoid that problem or minimize it. And that is, don't look up how to tweak that compressor. Learn everything you can about how compressors work.
Mm-hmm.
Learn what is unique about that one. Why does this one work this way? Why does this one work this way? And just use your ears. So you're not following some guy on YouTube that says, okay, so your kick drum goes to the 1176 and we do this and push that button and then we get that kick sound. And then you try it and it doesn't sound anything like it because it's not the same kick drum.
Not the same air.
It's not the same air. It's not hitting as hard. It's not the same microphone. It's
right.
That sort of tends to send people off into getting stuck.
Learn the concepts, figure it out, experiment.
Learn the concepts, solve the problem.
Use your ears.
Use your ears.
Yeah.
Try not to mix with your eyes. I mean, I have to fight myself to do it too.
Well, because it's digital. It's like, God, man.
There's so many pretty pictures to look at. Some of these plugins have some great user interfaces.
Sound like shit. No.
Well, it's anything can sound good. I not that long ago, and it really wasn't on purpose. It was just that. So we have two different Pro Tools systems and two different iLocks, and one of the iLocks has like all the fancy plugins on it, and the other one basically has just Pro Tools and whatever comes with Pro Tools.
Stock.
Yeah.
The forbidden
basically,
stock.
Yeah, basically just, the air reverbs and the four-band, just their EQs, their compressors.
Which I think I can already see where you're going with this, but...
I just, that was the one that was over here. I just started using it, and the results were spectacular. I mean, it made me work differently in the sense that I didn't grab what I normally grab.
It limited you to a certain extent. It made me
rethink what I was doing. And it's like, it just goes back to the fundamental fact that it is not the hammer, it's the guy swinging it. It's knowing what to do. Right? And yes, a good microphone makes a big difference. But if it's pointed at somebody's chin, it's a waste of money. Do you follow? It's a tool. You have to know how to use the tools. And basically, I was handed basically a bunch of very generic, simple, straightforward tools. and was not having all my, normal grabby over here for this limiter and my, my H delay and, things that just sound cool and that kind of stuff. I just had to make it sound like I want it to sound. And I should do that more often. With a couple of exceptions.
Right.
A couple of exceptions.
Are you a parallel guy? Do you use it often? I mean, have you gone through?
Yes. In terms of compression, parallel compression?
Anything.
Okay, so I do it a ton in the analog world. I do it less in the digital world because I also have to solve for the latency issues.
Mm-hmm. And it can happen.
Yeah.
It can happen.
The about the best parallel stuff, plug-in stuff that I do is a compressor that already has parallel built into it, so I can
mix knob or whatever.
Yeah. So I'm not literally running it to one stereo bus
out and internally. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do a lot of parallel stuff, but I also do a lot of parallel stuff using different channels and different microphones.
Right. It's
some challenges, like a singer that has a very challenging voice in a certain range. It's very soft. In this mid range, it just comes out and just peels your scalp back. So I literally had 2 complete input chains. A microphone that sounded good on her softer voice, and a signal chain and a compressor, and then another one for when she opened up, and I'd switch back and forth.
Solving problems.
And really that was a guess at, I knew I was going to have the problem. I don't know how I'm going to solve it, but this gives me options.
Gives you an option for sure. Yeah, because there's other ways that you can,
and you can blend and
automate plugins. You ride shit, but at the end of the day, it's like just solve the problem.
Yep. You just make it work.
That's it. So we're reaching the end.
Speed round. Or do you want something else? You have other questions?
We got one more big one at the end, but I'll save that for then. But we're gonna throw these at you, and I'm sure you are going to pass with flying colors.
You never know. I might say some bizarre ass shit.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Vocal mic.
57.
Wow. Snare.
Josephson E22.
Mike, plenty of those for you when I was here. Doesn't surprise me. Kick.
Microtech Gefell 930 or D12E. They're both actually completely different.
Yeah, they are. I was going to say.
And actually, in a pinch, and Earthworks sounds pretty good too. It's just I
love the D12.
It's really hard. It's really hard to pick for stuff like that because, like the vocal mic, sometimes the 57 is the right choice. Usually, I'll start with a Telefunken U47.
Right.
But sometimes that's not the right choice. So that was a little bit me playing on you, but
that's okay.
Yeah,
it's all right. Console.
API. They're fucking
so that stayed the same because I remember we talked about this years ago when I was here.
I mean, there are. I haven't really had my hands on the new Neve. I don't ever expect to really. Man, that's $1 million console. I like the way APIs sound. I like their headroom. I like that when you use them lightly, even the classical guys love it. And if you push it, it snarls like a fucking tiger. it's just cool.
That's cool.
You know, it can do lots of things, and this thing's built like a battleship. I mean, this particular one is I think particularly cool because it is a surround. Oops, you didn't do that. It is a surround console, and even though I don't do much surround mixing on this desk, surround mixing and analog is a bit,
right.
You know, let's make my life really hard. But it gives me all of these master buses. So I've got 3 stereo master buses, plus I've got the front stereo that I can add.
Yeah.
I've got the surround stereo and these 2 monos, all of which can be sent to my Grandmaster.
Right.
So it's super flexible. It sounds great. You know, it's dirty. And you know, we had some issues with it when it was new because anything like this that's brand new, and I mean, this is all hand soldered, point to point. There's just a lot of shit that goes into one of these, and it takes a little while to track down all the weirdness. But I love this console. I love this console for... Shh, don't tell anybody. Eves are overrated.
You were off the mic anyway when you said that, so I won't tick it up.
I'll just mute.
I'll mute.
They sound great. I mean, I have some 1084s.
Yeah.
I don't generally use them, but they're very cool. I mean, it just depends on what you like and what you're going for. You know,
well,
it's a taste preference. I mean, like for example, I'm a huge fan of the DW Fern mic preamps. They're insanely expensive,
right?
But they have a musical sound. It's sort of like they get the musical sound of a tube preamp, but not the noise. Mm-hmm. They have an incredible amount of headroom. So, like, I could take the kick drum plugged into the API and it'll feel kind of flat. I'll plug it into that and it'll just go boom. Yeah. So.
Well, then, prees.
Prees.
I think you and I have a little bit of a different... I'm curious to see what you think on that.
It's sort of also what works with your workflow, too. It depends on at what point do you do things. I like the API preamps for a lot of things. I like...
Clean as hell.
Well, until you start to drive them. You start pushing that transformer, things change.
Right.
That's really the thick about it, is that they have sort of a couple of different ranges.
But there's no it's just volume on the APIs, right?
It's just an amplification circuit. That's
okay.
It. It's a wire with gain.
Okay. So things just change when you put that gain up.
Well, just the harder you push the circuit, the closer to its tolerance.
Right.
You know, as you get closer to the headroom, it responds a little differently.
Well, you sometimes do a little attenuation beforehand, so you have more headroom before.
Absolutely. I use inline pads a lot. Pretty much.
I know,
standard,
because you had me
almost all
wiring
drums. Because there's so much.
No, you have to.
With modern microphones that have such high outputs, you know, you could be losing all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
That, you know, hitting even stuff that's really before the amplification circuit, you could be clipping.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Or the very beginnings of it. So, yeah, I definitely pad things like that going in.
Well, you guys have a bunch of the -10 and -20s that we would,
-10,
when Ryan and I were here,
30s,
we would just I remember you had even on like overheads and room mics, we even had -10s on at times, sometimes even -20s on a drum kit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on like how close they are to the drum.
And what's going on in context.
Like I have to put, if I'm miking my kick drum, which has the solid outer head and has basically the super low resonance thing, I have to put a 30 dB pad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's actually producing stuff below 30.
Yeah.
And huge waveforms, and it'll just, I want to be able to capture that, but very few mic preamps have the headroom to do that.
Right. Guitar. Electric.
Believe it or not, what I've been really liking lately is Sheps. They're neutral and warm. They don't sound like a 421 or a 57, both of which are great. But they capture a little extra detail that I kind of like. And if it's a really loud guitar amp, M149 is about the best thing out there because it actually has a tonal characteristic a little bit like a 57.
Cool.
But you can stick it in front of Jimmy Herring's amp that's playing at 130 dB.
Jeez.
And they'll take enormous beatings.
How about acoustic?
I go back and forth. So I have a couple of different setups that I use. Sometimes I will use 2 omnis and a figure 8. Sometimes I will use 2 cardioids. I have a setup that I use for people that are singing and playing guitar at the same time. They finally found a setup that works, so you don't have all that weird phasing things where
bleed too.
Yeah, I found it's sort of like a way of setting things up, and I use a lot of figure 8 pattern microphones now.
Right.
That's like one of the biggest changes in the last 5 years for me.
Yeah, is
using figure 8s a lot more. Because you can create these complete nulls. It's pretty cool. But Microtech Gefell makes these little pencil condensers that sound really great. I have these mics, these Sanken microphones, the CO100Ks. And they sound, they have a frequency response up to 100K, literally. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. You can't hear anything that high. But what you can hear is the timing differences. Like if you put those 2 omnis in front of an orchestra, you can hear the difference in location from the first violin to the third violin. And it's because, the higher the frequency, the more discerning it will be in terms of the timing differences. Mm-hmm. And, at 96, we're still only, getting 48K recorded, but it makes a difference. And we've done some pretty extensive testing to see, is this really hocus pocus or not? The thing about it is that many times it'll get more information than you need.
Right.
So I love it on acoustic guitar, but you have to run it through a low-pass filter. You have to shave that top end, otherwise...
Especially afterwards...
on an acoustic.
Right. And after with some processing, and by the time you're getting to your master bus,
well,
it's
you just need to warm it up. But
yeah,
it does, even warmed up, it does something different. I also really like Coles.
Right.
On acoustic guitar. I like about. I haven't found many mics I don't like on acoustic guitar, but they all have different positions. Actually, my current favorite setup is the 251. Shh, don't tell anybody this is a secret. The 251 in figure 8 and the 2 Omni Sankens. That's how I did Brent Lambert's classical guitar record.
And blended taste.
So you have this really solid center.
Right.
And you have this incredibly spacious side that you just control by how closely you move to the guitar, dial in the amount of room that you have.
It's almost like natural MS in a way.
Yeah, sort of.
Which to me is the best MS.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, because of that unnatural MS. No, I use mid-side a lot.
Me too.
And I don't really record using mid-side. I probably should, considering how much I like it, but I tend to do it as more of a post thing.
It doesn't need to be drastic MS. Just something to.
I finally talked Brent into selling me this box, which is just a mid-side analog processor. So you send in a stereo signal, splits it to mid-side. You can insert something, and then it converts it back to stereo. So you can take your stereo compressor and do center compression and side compression.
Right.
It's really cool. Same thing with EQ. So in the analog world, there's a bunch of ways of doing it in the digital world too. But yeah, that's a really helpful mixing and mastering trick.
Synth.
Nord, stage 3.
Piano.
Which one? You're talking about a grand, right?
Whatever comes to mind for you.
I don't know if I haven't heard enough. I think the best sounding piano I ever heard was a Bosendorfer. But it's none of them are right for everything.
Right.
We have a Yamaha that is great.
That's 9 feet, right?
Yeah, it's a full concert grand, but it's really too bright for a lot of classical players.
The low end on that thing is insane.
It is epic.
And I mean low end as in definition low end.
Yeah.
I mean, it rumbles, but it's almost like a Stingray bass being picked.
Yeah.
That's how defining it is.
It is. So, I mean,
Incredible.
I love that. I love that piano. I don't know how the hell. I'm not a pianist, so I wouldn't know. I know how to mic that piano because I've mic'd it a lot. Actually, if I had to pick a piano, it would be a Hammond B3.
Which we have.
We have a really good one.
Bass.
I'm a P bass man.
Ooh.
I'm a P bass man. Yeah, I like the Fender bass tones. I can appreciate some of the weird stuff like that.
That thing is
fretless.
nutty.
That's the best sounding fretless bass I've ever heard, because if you play it and you don't play it like a fretless, it doesn't have to sound like a fretless. Like if you play it cleanly, it can sound like a regular bass.
Interesting.
And it does. I don't know how they do it, and it doesn't buzz. Anyway.
Wow.
So
the action was really low when I was looking at it. Yeah.
It's cool. I mean, there are lots of great sounding basses, but it's like guitars these days. There's so many boutique options.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you pick one.
Right.
If I had to go out and buy an electric guitar right now, I'd buy one of Wes Lamb's hybrid. He's got the guitar that's 5 guitar strings and 3 bass strings.
Oh.
2 separate pickups. Whew. Sound amazing.
That's interesting.
That's what Charlie Hunter uses.
Yeah.
He's also got the company that's making pre-war guitars. We've just been talking about. He discovered a way of aging the wood, pre-aging the wood, which is really the secret to why old Martins sound better than new Martins.
Yeah.
But anyway,
strings,
Sheps,
horns,
brass, definitely Coles, woodwinds. If it's classical woodwinds, it may be like the Sheps because they're very neutral. If it's like a sax solo, like a rock or a blues sax solo,
blowing your head off.
Yeah, it'd be a Telefunken U47.
Woo! And just crank that puppy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, also Coles sound great on those things too.
Tape.
Love it.
Yeah.
Wish I had more call for it. Don't. so we don't keep one because the worst thing you can do
Just let it
with an
sit.
old tape machine is let it sit.
Yep.
I love the way it sounds, but nobody wants to slow their project down that much. People forget, besides the cost of the tape, it's a completely different workflow. You have to rewind and fast forward and change reels, and there's a lot. It's a slower pace.
Yeah.
I love the way it sounds, but I'll probably get another one at some point. Like everybody else, and basically use it as a 24-channel saturation plug-in. I do.
24-channel summing box.
Like that Roomful record, that was all tracked on 2-inch tape.
Oh.
Yep. And you can hear it.
Yep.
You can hear it.
Compression or compressor.
So it depends. If it was a mono compressor, single channel, it would probably be an LA2A.
I think you and I are friends in that department for sure. Yep.
Stereo, I really like that DW Fern, but also the Manley is just magic. There's nothing it can't do.
Manleys are...
They're sort of bulletproof. You can do all kinds of different stuff. In terms of tube bus, that Tube Tech is magnificent.
Yeah. I like that because it has...
It's also that particular one's a multi-band.
It's got no needles.
No needles.
All ears.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it does. It does have little ladder.
Oh, it's like a distressor where it's got your little...
It's just got little things.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's you can tell it's really a tube bus or a mastering thing because I think... How's it? Yeah, the first line down is half a dB.
Ah.
2 down is a dB.
Right.
So,
right.
You don't get to 10 dB until you're using up 7/8 of the heater.
Yeah.
So it's for light stuff, but it's amazing on drums. Really amazing on drums.
EQ.
I don't know because they all do different things.
Oh, yes, they do.
The GML is the most neutral, surgically wonderful EQ.
That looks like almost like a mag type, you know.
It can do anything.
Yeah.
Color-wise, I like the APIs, and actually, I like the Neve EQs much more than I like the Neve preamps.
A lot of grain.
Yeah,
a lot of grain.
A lot of grain. I mean, actually, if I had to pick one, it would probably be the Massive Passive. Just because it's got so much magic and weirdness in it, but you can't... It's not a... It's the perfect tone shaping thing.
Right.
You can't, like, isolate something.
Gotcha.
Especially EQs, Pultec.
Oh, yeah.
I've got that Pultec, and that red one on the top is actually a stereo Pultec. And it's like the 1A, but it adds the mid-band cut like the 5A.
Oh, that thing... That's everything. It's one and done.
Yeah,
at that point,
across stereo guitars or something like that.
Woo!
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah,
you make them sound any way you want to.
Yeah.
From like that really sort of muscle car low end to something that is sparkly. To it's just not something. It's not something to use delicately.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Reverb.
Whatever I've got around.
Delay.
The same. I mean, there are some. Okay, I take that back. I really like the. Are we just talking about analog stuff? Or are we talking about digital stuff too?
The first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, so delay. I really like the McDSP delay. They have the MC300 or EC300.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, spectacular. It will do perfect tape delays. It models old weird digital delays. I mean, with like the tape delay, you can add wow and flutter. It's just that is the best delay I've ever used in terms of colored sounding things.
Right.
That really does stand out. That H delay is it H delay? I can't remember. I think it's might be a Waves plugin, but it's sort of like a lo-fi delay that's good for slapback and that sort of thing.
I'm a big fan of tape delay.
Yeah,
Big fan of it.
I'll show you what it looks like.
Sure.
And you open up the lid and you see the tape. Yeah, and
it slows your computer down.
right. But it's cool. There is a tape saturation plugin on the Harrison console.
Ooh.
That allows you to pick the quality of the tape and the speed at which you're recording.
Oh, it's kind of like the J37 plug.
Yeah, I don't know.
The one, I think it's like a Waves or whatever. It's got.
Yeah, but it's cool. You turn it to the 60 IPS and the highest setting, and just sort of hit it, and it's like that's like what I would want in a mastering lab.
Right,
it's really nice.
They're pretty cool, the tape saturation plugins.
They are.
They've got those, to me, have a lot of color. They sound very analog, even though they're not, but, you know.
Yeah. They've modeled that really well, I think.
Last one.
Yeah.
B3/Leslie.
That's actually pretty easy. It's usually 414s on the top. Mm-hmm. And a D112 or D12.
Ah, okay.
Occasionally, that Microtech FL 930, which just gets great bottom end.
I guess you can use a 421 if you want it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Anything like that.
Yeah.
I like the sound of ribbons on a B3, but it's just too risky.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much bottom end that can come out of there, and right now I've got a Royer that's I have to send off to get re-ribboned. I guess that's what you call it. It's not a new diaphragm. These are hard questions because I use different things.
That's why we're asking them.
All day, every day, I do something different.
Well, you passed with an A+ in my book.
Oh well,
so
and that's the only book that matters. Clearly,
the white coat, lab,
the white coat, and
lab,
you're scarf boy now. I'm afraid. Actually, are those still called? It's not really a scarf.
I don't know. It's pretty long. You got to do a multi-wrap.
Yeah. It's more like the Middle Eastern thingy. You know what I'm talking about? The cloth.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't mention the C12, which is actually one of my favorite.
I was going to say, I can't believe.
But the C12s. The thing is, that the C12s
such a
can
gorgeous
be used
mic
on everything. So they don't necessarily. I would put the C12s as string mics.
Mm-hmm.
You forgot one thing really important, and that is room mics.
Well, I was going to bring it up. All right, so let's go. Let's reverse. Let's go back.
So room mics would be the Sankins, the C12s, or these DPA, these tube DPA microphones, which are large diaphragm. They don't look like a large diaphragm, but they're very open and natural. The Sankins are really cool because of how much high frequency energy they capture in the room.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like even at a distance, you don't lose the high end, which is cool. So, but yeah, C12s for any kind of ensemble, the C12s are great.
Yeah, I mean, rooms are. There's so many options. Like the 67 to me is a classic.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, now that I think about it, I used to use the C12s a lot on the piano, but the piano has gotten a little bit brighter. Like the hammers are hardening or something. So it's been I've been using them less. Now, female vocalist, it's always my first choice. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's also before I had my current acoustic guitar set up, those were C12s.
I remember when I was here during the Autumn Nichols session, a lot of C12 action.
Yeah. Well, it was. I was using C12s and Royers on her guitar.
Right.
Not Royers, Coles. I ended up with a really bizarre, interesting combination. Was it C12s?
I think I remember miking C12s on her acoustic and her vocal when I was here.
It was definitely her vocal mic.
Yeah. God, what a gorgeous vocal with that and her.
Yeah.
So airy, but not piercing.
Kind of what's happened is that I've so fallen in love with the Elan 251, and I only have one of those. That when I'm grabbing one mic, I reach for that one instead of the C12.
Nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think.
Well, things change, like you said. I mean,
besides, you
get bored.
What's the point of having access to all this if you are not constantly exploring and trying new things?
I'm surprised you didn't say the SM7. On
you know
something.
what? If I made more rock records,
because that's like my jam. That thing is on.
Yeah, I mean, if I made more rock records, I would probably use that a lot. Right now, it's always narrator's microphone.
Right.
That's what I used for the bluegrass opera. It had a narrator. It is great on a snare drum. It's great on a hi-hat. It's great on a loud vocal.
You ever use it on a bass cab? Because I fell in love with it.
I haven't, but I can imagine it would roll off a lot of the grumbly stuff.
I've been using it with the LA2A printing straight into Pro Tools, mixed with Sans, and it's like, whoa. And then blend the taste with L1 or something just to bring everything together.
I like Sans amps.
I love them.
I actually have a hardware one.
I've got a
from the 80s.
I don't know. Mine's probably like 10 or 15 years old.
It's a great bass DI.
Dude.
You just add a little bit of hair and it's like, boom, done.
That mid-range.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that quite like it.
Anyway, if you ever want to try an SM7 on...
I've got one. I just, for some reason...
I found a lot of cool things.
What about guitar amps? Work on a guitar amp?
Sure. Well, you're a car guy.
Yeah. Car amp, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so the car amps are a little different than other amps because they have a lot more punch than most amps do. In other words, they have faster transients.
Well, I think the speaker choice too, right? Because they usually have more top, like in wattage. There's just more.
Yeah,
headroom.
Basically they have like really giant capacitors and all that other stuff.
I'm weird because I just love a good 30-30-30-30, like Celestial, like a 4x12
sure.
with a 100-watt Marshall. Because there's a big difference to me with 475s, like your traditional Marshall cabinet.
We've got a couple of new cars that you have got to try.
I'm a fan of the 30s. It just it's just like this. No, like the 30s in a Marshall cab,
right?
Comparatively to the 75s,
right?
Because when you run the 100-watt through, and you don't even have to hit it that hard, but it's just is gooey. Oh,
I got a mate to my Epiphone amp, so now I have two.
Ooh.
Can run it in stereo.
That's nasty.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
you have the tremolo set a little differently.
Right, right. And just it's natural. Yeah.
But there's a car amp out there that I think is modeled on an AC30, and it just sounds wonderful. Anyway.
No, I mean.
So,
Yes.
Desert Island microphone. You can only have one microphone for the rest of your life. What would it be? And take everything into account. Is it going to last? Is it easy to use?
Why do I feel like there's a right or wrong answer to this?
There is no right or wrong answer. But you have to think about not just like, well, of course, I'd have nothing but Telefunkins. No. One microphone to do everything. You'll never get any more microphones. They have to last.
Mm-hmm.
What would you buy?
I mean, the 57 just comes to mind first.
Mine, it's probably the 421.
Ooh.
But it's the 57 or the 421 because the 421 does some stuff on drums.
A little bit more low end.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's a little tough because
that's tough. Well,
that's a whole lot of
when
the
you
same
think about
sort of curve.
horns.
Yeah.
The 421 is going to add a little bit more of that roundness.
Anything with bottom end.
That's a tough, man. That's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what we should do?
Actually, you know what? Desert Island microphone, I would change my answer.
Really?
Now, if I was allowed to have a condenser microphone, it would be these little Sheps. Because I have tried them on everything and they sound good on everything. They're not like the best mic for everything.
Right.
But a guitar amp, percussion, drums, strings, horns. You can put it in front of anything. It's pretty amazing.
Actually, so one last quick one.
Mm-hmm.
Shaker. Because that's like a whole other can of worms.
So my only answer to the shaker question is my banana shaker.
And also,
it doesn't matter what mic it is, as long as it's my banana shaker.
Okay. Shakers are weird.
Shakers are weird.
Shakers are weird. It's almost like the cheaper they are, the better they sound.
Yeah.
It's strange.
Yeah, a coffee can with a couple of coffee beans in it can sound really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have this one shaker that I like, and it's shaped like a banana. I also have an orange and an apple.
Last question for you.
Okay.
By the way, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for...
My pleasure. I'm having a good time.
Good. That's the whole point. If you could go back in time to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, with the experience that you've acquired, what would you tell him?
Find a way to get your ass in the studio as soon as possible. I wish I could have been exposed to it as a teen and developed in my 20s so that when I hit my 30s, I already knew what I was doing. But then again, when I think about it, there was a lot of sort of life and business knowledge that I had acquired by the time I tried to open a studio that probably kept me from making some really stupid mistakes financially and personality wise. But anyway, yes, that would be my only regret, that I didn't, because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew it. I just couldn't figure out how to get from A to B. Like if I could have spent my entire college career in a recording studio, that's what I would have done. Except it's probably not enough time for beer. So there's that.
Well,
thank you, buddy.
Hey,
you're very good at this.
Well, thank you.
You're
very good at this, which is why you're here.
Yeah.
But I'm again just very grateful for the time that you and Mike allowed for me to be here in those earlier days, and just the things that were learned.
Well, I can tell you earned every dime you made, which was.
I think I made a couple hundred with the Carl Palmer.
Yeah. But my favorite joke is
right.
dock your pay. Anyway,
any last words?
Don't eat the shrimp.
We'll take note of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Description box on YouTube. Send me some links if there's anything.
Yeah.
And we're out. Thanks so much for checking in, tuning in. If you stayed with us the whole way through, Jason Damico Show. Somebody's been trying to call me for the last 10 minutes, and we're going to try to answer that. We'll see you later.